So welcome to this EPP Group talk here in the European Parliament in Studio One on Russia. From red terror to terrorist state, is a different Russia possible? And joining us, first of all, is Rasa Juknevičienė, MEP from Lithuania with the EPP Group, also ex-defense minister,
yes.
So very interesting as well.
It happens.
And Yuri Felshtinsky, you're a historian based in Boston. You've written extensively on Soviet history, including the rise to power of Lenin, and then on to the rise to power of Putin. So very, very interesting to discuss this as we look at where Russia is going in this war against Ukraine and what could be the upshot of this. As we saw the fall of Kherson recently, people are talking about how maybe Putin is weakened, but to what extent, and are his days numbered or not? So why don't we start first, Yuri, if you could say briefly, because that's what this book is all about, and the others that you wrote is about this, the history of Russia and what it is doing now. Now, in the background is, and a very interesting discussion we had in this earlier event today. It was a big, long discussion about the background here of the security services in Russia, that they have had a strong influence, first of all, in strengthening the communist government at the very start after 1917, but also in, of course, bringing Putin to power and keeping him in power. What is the power of those state services, security services, then and now?
Well, I think we are dealing with state security as the institution which took power in Russia in 2000 and to install Putin to be the president as the representative of the former KGB, current FSB. And that's what Putin is continuing to be. And for this reason, our problem is much bigger, because our problem is not just Putin. If this would be just Putin, we could replace him and everything would be fine. Yeah. But this is not so. And the struggle to take power in 2000 started literally in 1917 when this state security was created. Because it's been built,
it's a network that has bolstered one government after another, right?
It's a huge network about which we do not even now have an understanding how huge it is. We still do not know how many thousands of people working for this system. We never knew.
And in your book, now this is the return of Russian terror and the threat of World War III blowing up Ukraine. How does that work into what is happening now, that they are continuing in this conflict that requires the support of the security services for that to continue, right?
Well, this book actually was written mainly in 2015. Okay. After the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, because those days it became clear to me that Putin will never stop until he takes control of Ukraine. So we know that in 22, in February, he started a full-scale war. And ironically, I think that 24th of February, on the one hand, is going to be written as the beginning of the Third World War. In history later, that it's going to be a major event. I think as a result of this war, Russia will be defeated. I just do not know, and probably no one knows, how long this will take. The war already continues for 8+ months, and how much we all pay for our victory.
Now, what if Russia is not defeated? Or what if the West does not show the concerted effort that it has up to now, that they cut a deal?
I think in many ways Russia is already defeated. After more than 8 months of war, it lost its army completely. Putin was trying, of course, to mobilize 300,000 additional people. They all went abroad, so he lost his second army even before the fight started. They're trying to mobilize now the third army, but this is the army which is not capable to fight against Ukrainian army, which is now very experienced.
Because there are a bunch of recruits, right, from the draft.
Correct,
yeah.
Professionals, and they do not have, ammunition. They do not have military equipment because they never planned to have this war as 8 months war. So militarily speaking, they're in terrible shape, and we could sleep quietly and just claim the victory, except that Russia has nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. Are they going to use them?
This is the most important question, seriously. This is the most important question. I would not say that I know the answer. I sincerely hope they will not use it, but I think if they plan to use it, if they have the idea to use it, they probably will try to use it from Belarus, not from the Russian Federation, since Belarus is, technically speaking, an independent state. And I think that's why Putin keeps Belarus independent. For this particular reason, formally independent. Otherwise, he would annex it, because we see how he loves to annex every piece of territory which he takes under his control. And what is suspicious is not just that he is not annexing it, but there is not a single person in Russia, in the parliament, in the press, who is talking about this, and this is an indication that this is done on purpose. So I think this is the most dangerous territory, Belarus. It was dangerous prior to invasion of 22, because it was clear that Putin has to take control of it first, and he took control in 2021. So we better watch Belarus.
Now, something that you mentioned in the longer event earlier today was that Belarus is kind of the key to what happens in the future. That if Lukashenko, the last dictator of Europe, the ruler of
Not
Belarus,
the last, Putin is also.
Well, yes, okay, all right, that's Europe. You're right. Is toppled, that could help to prevent Russia from using Belarus as a base, as a way to perhaps go into Ukraine again from the north. Maybe get your reaction, also Rasa's reaction on that.
No, yours first.
Well, the reason why Putin stopped in 2014, because he realized very quickly that you cannot take Ukraine without moving into direction of Kiev. And if you look at the map, you understand that you cannot attack Kiev from the territory of Russian Federation. It's too far. Yeah. So he had to take Belarus first. And actually, in the book which was written and published in 2014, I wrote that we should watch Belarus. And the moment we see Russian troops there, this indicates that they are going to invade Ukraine. We missed it. Somehow, probably because of coronavirus, but that's why Belarus is important. If we take Belarus out of Putin's control, not only he is losing geopolitically important territory which allows him to attack Eastern Europe with conventional forces, but we also take away his ability to strike from neutral or whatever independent Belarus.
Then Rasa, that brings me to ask you on the policy side, Madam former Defense Minister, how do you see this, and how important is it for, I guess, Europe to continue bolstering and strengthening the anti-Lukashenko movement in Belarus?
Of course, it's very important, because I believe that those people, they were in the streets in 2020, they still keep the same mood, the same spirit in their hearts, despite that regime was able to stop them and keep them silenced now inside Belarus. But I am sure that Belarusians, they support Ukrainians, and they don't want to be involved directly into this war. They don't want to be mobilized, despite that Putin is pushing Lukashenko to do this, and maybe mobilization in Belarus also will happen, I don't know. But back to what's already happened, many were shocked and surprised what happened in 24th of February this year, because many people they were not evaluating the situation in the proper way, as Yuri Felshtinsky was not only himself but many of people were following the situation and were not so surprised as many in the West, because you know what Putin was preparing for such large-scale war, but not necessarily. In the very beginning, he was expecting that Ukraine will fight, and of course his first version was when I was minister. You mentioned of defense.
Yes.
He wanted to take Ukraine without the war, via Yanukovych, via meddling into the election and taking with so-called soft power, or I would say corrupt power or dirty power. Because what happened after Yanukovych won election, he refused to join NATO. Military bases in Crimea were prolonged the term for so-called rent for Russian Federation, and Putin wanted to test NATO and us via Baltic states. That was his first idea.
Which led then to the Euromaidan uprising and the fall of his government.
They saved. So this is why I always thank Ukrainians. They saved us from blitzkrieg in 2014 when they resisted, or uprising was against Yanukovych.
Yes.
So then Putin changed his plan and he annexed Crimea, launched this war in eastern part of Ukraine. But at that time, not very many were taking seriously. Of course, at that time, it was much more serious reaction than Georgia happened in 2008.
Right.
But at that time, of course, NATO woke up, and we have now in Eastern Europe more troops, everything, because to take a person who is in deep sleep, sleeping in the night is easier than when person is in daytime watching situation carefully.
Well, talking about sleep, I mean, I think you suggested during the discussion earlier today was that the West was asleep, or they missed it. They missed it when it came to 2007, was it, in Georgia? 2008 in Georgia, then 2014 Crimea. And if we had stood, you said that if we had stood the line and imposed sanctions like we have now, back in, say, 2014 or even 2008, we wouldn't be here in this situation today, right?
They missed it partially. Well, first of all, they never realized that in 2000 the KGB took power, the FSB took power. And this is actually the first time in history, literally, when the state security controlled a state, and a major state in Europe, specifically nuclear states. This never happened before. Then, of course, they lived with this idea that they understand that Russia is a corrupt country and that Putin is a corrupt politician. And there is it's a kind of good news, because if the person is corrupt, you always could buy him because he is interested in money. Okay. So we miss that we are dealing with a completely irrational people and irrational structure, because this is not about money anymore. It was, until a certain period, it was about money. But then it was not about money. It was about, the control of the world.
Restoring the former empire to its greatness.
Restoring former empire, because, again, we do not have to forget that Russia was always an empire. It was empire prior to 1917, it was empire prior to 1991, a communist empire. And so Putin sold very easily to people this idea that all their problems are happening because the world does not want Russia to exist as an empire. Mm-hmm. And this is like the fate of Russia and the fate of Russians to live in imperial state, and to the fate of Russia to be an empire. So unless Russia change this attitude towards itself. I think we are going to have problem with this state, and again, I think the problem is not just Putin. The problem is politically speaking and military speaking with the FSB controlling the state.
Right.
But on philosophical level, Russia has to look at itself as if it's just a normal country, not an empire. And for this, Russia has to be defeated in the war. Otherwise, this notion of empire which was not allowed to exist by Europe or by NATO or by the United States, it will live with them for some time.
Terrifying, says the Daily Telegraph on the front of this book. And having in that context the idea of how the security services are largely running the show, right?
Correct.
Politically. Then what does that mean if Putin is weakened now, and if he somehow is taken from the stage, how does that change anything?
Well, first, it may not change anything at all. Secondly, we should not consider that Putin is the worst possibility, because there are a lot of people within the FSB who are actually not happy with Putin, but not because he started the war with Ukraine, but because he did not start the most aggressive war against the West. So there are actually voices in Russia, and we hear them from time to time, who are saying that, well, we have to say that this is a war against NATO. We have to conduct it as the war against the entire West. And this is a danger which we are facing, unless we find the way to end this war while it's still within the Ukrainian borders. But the way to do it is, again, to help Ukrainians to win the war.
Help Ukraine. Okay, then on the policy side, then, Rasa, what do we need to do to bolster Ukraine at this point?
Yeah.
And now that Kherson has fallen, that shows the effectiveness of the Ukrainian military, but how much further can that go?
I just wanted to say some words on is Putin worst, or maybe others will come even worse.
Yeah.
But I think because they are allowed to speak loudly in Russia, inside Russia, I still believe that it's part of the regime as well, to threaten us, to send a message to the Western countries that, look, if not Putin, so others will be even worse, and you have to have some kind of dialogue with Putin, because otherwise it will be even worse.
It's the devil we know.
This is my opinion. Right. But on the victory of Ukraine, or all of us, yes, Putin lost this war in the very beginning when he was not able to take Kiev. It's very clear. But on the other hand, it's still a lot of losses, a lot of people are dying, a lot of blood. I am comparing with World War II. I'm not a historian, so maybe Yuri will correct me, but I feel that today we are somehow end of 43 or beginning or at 44, when 44 especially, when many understood that Hitler lost this war, but still the war was going, and millions and millions people were killed, cities destroyed, a lot of losses happened. So maybe we are now in the same situation. So that's why we have to keep going forward and to support Ukraine, even with offensive weapons. We were
as
talking
you called for during
yes,
the
we
talk.
are calling for that, because if we will do not enough from Western side, especially with weapons, more people will be killed. It's not, when we say offensive weapons, I think we have to switch into saying defensive weapons, despite that officially the name of these weapons are offensive, but we will defend with such offensive weapons people, innocent people, and people, they will be killed because we will not delivering them enough. And of course we have to do our best to name Russia as terrorist terrorist state, not to be afraid to establish special tribunal, sanctions, and this is, I think, the most important sanction, indirect but sanction against Putin and all those around, if they will know that court is already established and they will be asked for that. When we're speaking and speaking for war crimes, for aggression against Ukraine. When we speak always never again, never again, never again, we didn't evaluate, we didn't condemn communism in proper way. So that's why this country from red state became terrorist state, because it was not evaluated, never internationally.
Now, what about the timing of Yuri's presence here? I think is quite important, isn't it? Because at this point there is debate over whether we should cut a deal or encourage the Ukrainians to cut a deal with the Russian government, or how much further should we be bolstering the Ukrainian war effort? And that, I think, is an important point to make with your presence here.
Ukrainian peace effort.
Yeah. Well, okay, there you go. Yes, peace effort.
Well, first of all, I really do not believe that it's possible to have a deal with Russia. I mean, even if Europe really wants to do this, because it's Putin who started the war and it's Russia who is still trying to occupy the entire Ukraine and probably some other countries. And I do not see any signals that these goals are changed and the policy of Russia is changed. So even if the West would agree to Putin's conditions...
And give him the Donbass.
Right. There are no conditions, because he wants everything. He wants... It sounds crazy, but that's how it is.
But what if he settles? What if he settles for Crimea and for Donbass?
Well, he won't, and if he settles, he will start another war in another month. And here's the practical point. Right now, we have the largest army in Europe, because Ukraine has the largest army at this point, which is able to fight, willing to fight, has experience to fight against Russian aggression. If we give out Ukraine to Putin, what is not probably possible because Ukrainians would never agree to this anyway, but if we say, all right, we stop any help to Ukraine, let them deal with this problem, then at the end, if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, what probably still not necessarily happens, then we will have the same problem with Putin without Ukraine.
Yeah, that could make, for instance, the countries in the Baltics nervous, where there is an ethnic Russian population, right, Rasa?
Not necessarily. In Lithuania, I don't feel any danger from ethnic Russians, so those they came after occupation, because we have only 5-6% of
But
those.
Estonia, Latvia is different.
Estonia, Latvia, yeah, but also now it's, I think, situation is not as dangerous as it was before. Even before the war, it was much more dangerous, because this propaganda, this disinformation warfare, Kremlin was more, has more influence than now. Now it's Latvians and others. Look, outcome of the last election in Latvia. These Russian political parties, they lost election totally, and it's not even among Russians. I think it's not popular to support Putin.
But could the next hotspot be Moldova? You made the point that there are 200,000 Russian passports given.
If Russia reaches Transnistria, what they're trying to do they were trying to do this from day number one. So far, of course, Ukrainians prevented them from reaching Transnistria, but if they reach Transnistria and will have a land corridor to support Russian troops in Transnistria, which are already there, then, of course, they will spark similar war in Moldova.
But liberation of Kherson is less.
Correct.
That's right.
Correct. This change, again, we were talking about Putin and his ability to fight. He is not able to fight, this is clear. He has no forces to fight, no weapons to fight, except for nuclear weapons. But the risk of him coming to the idea to use nuclear weapons, I think is much bigger with this war continue longer and longer when he sees that that's what West is afraid of. Because the West, of course, is afraid to give Ukrainians offensive weapons because the West is afraid that this would provoke Putin to use nuclear weapons. But this actually works in reverse with Putin.
Now, you also mentioned that Putin was held back from using nuclear weapons by people within the FSB. Is that right?
No, what I say is that we are expecting that he is going to have a position within the FSB for him to use nuclear weapons. And I suggested that the picture might be different, that there are actually a crowd of people standing around him saying, let's use it, let's use it, let's use it. I really do not believe that there is any opposition to Putin within the FSB. As soon as there would be, we will see it, because they will take down Putin, they will take down Prigozhin, they will take down Shoigu, because it would be very easy to blame them for everything. But this is not happening.
But what about these increasing voices on the nationalist side in Russia criticizing the war effort, at least the way it's being carried out? Is that not an indication that Putin could be weakened?
Precisely, but they're criticizing him from the point that he's not doing enough. They're not criticizing him from the point that he started a war which is damaging Russia, blah, blah, blah. No. So this is an opposition which is allowed to exist. This is controlled opposition. Again, this is controlled maybe by the FSB. Some of those structures and parties were created back by KGB during the Soviet years. So they allow them to exist for a reason. And this reason is, again, to push Putin further and further and further towards the world confrontation, which in many ways is unavoidable unless Russia is defeated in Ukraine. So we always come to this understanding that the only way now to defeat Russia is to allow Ukraine to have free hands and to give them weapons, to give them all support they need, since they are ready to fight, what is a great deal. It's a great danger, and Ukrainians managed to to successfully fight against this aggression.
So that indicates a longer conflict then, as far as you're concerned?
This is possible unless we give Ukraine everything they need.
Yeah.
And Putin, are his days numbered? You described him as the CEO of the FSB.
They're numbered. In a book which I published in 21, I wrote that he created a very stable system and maybe in power until 2036, as he planned, unless he starts a war. And on 24th of February, he started the war, and this made his days numbered.
So
the question is, again, the question is not if we win and if he loses. The question is when he would lose and how much we will pay for the victory.
How much we will pay. Rasa, any final thought yourself?
Yeah, my final is the sentence that if we want to have sustainable secure European continent, not only European Union, European continent, we have to help Ukraine to win this war, and we have to defeat Putin. Otherwise, it will be permanent waves of the wars coming from this strange country like Russian Federation. And today we are witnessing, I still think, and it was my first message for myself when Putin launched this large-scale war, that is the beginning of the end. Look what's going on in South Caucasus. Look what's going on in Central Asia. So Putin is losing everything around. Maybe today it's very difficult to predict to the future what will happen.
But you think his days are numbered?
I think it's I am in the same position that it's the beginning of the end, and we have to do our best in the West to help to happen it as soon as possible.
Rasa, Yuri, thank you so much for joining us on this EPP Group talk here in the European Parliament. For more information, keep in mind eppgroup.eu and the handle in the social networks @EPP Group. My name is Chris Burns. See you next time.